Good morning and welcome to Rising. Happy Tuesday. It is April Fool's Day, which is always a concerning day for journalists as we don't know what's true and what's not on the internet. And I am joined by a new guest co-host, Bofta Yimam. Welcome to Rising.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. We're so glad to try out new, interesting personalities, and I'm really looking forward to what you have to say about today's news.
Awesome. Well, there's a lot going on, and I know you've been working on that radar. So what's on it? Tell us.
Happy to tell you. So here's a big scoop. Vice President Kamala Harris's so-called grassroots supporters on social media were actually paid by a group of wealthy Democratic donors to circulate pro-Harris talking points. In other words, her support on TikTok and Instagram wasn't grassroots at all. It was paid for. Now, that's according to a really terrific piece of reporting from my friend, independent journalist Lee Fong, a frequent Rising guest. He exposed Way to Win, a Democratic organizing group that paid $10 million to various social media content creators like Harry Sisson and Kate Abu. Way to Win also paid non-political content creators to insert pro-Kamala messaging into their social media posts. Here was one example. This TikTok user made a video praising, for instance, Harris's selection of Tim Walz. Let's watch.
Bro, who is Tim Walz? Kamala Harris picked him as her running mate. I don't know who the fuck he is, but we're about to find out. Who is Tim Walz? He's the governor of Minnesota, and he's 60. Walz retired from the Minnesota Army National Guard 1st Battalion, 125th Field Artillery.
And here's another example. This is comedian and actress Ilana Glazer talking about how bad another Trump term would be in an Instagram reel.
So that's our series, folks. We have 3 months left until November 5th. Conservatives have been scheming and plotting for over 50 years to get to this moment where they could have some clown puppet.
To be abundantly clear, those content creators were paid by a Democratic consulting organization to create that content. Way to Win, by the way, is a dark money group, so we don't know exactly where they get their funding. But according to Lee Fong, the group co-hosted a series of events with the Open Society Foundation. That's the advocacy organization funded by left-wing billionaire George Soros. So you can probably read between the lines on that one. Now, conservatives often regard George Soros as a shady liberal puppeteer lurking behind every corner. But Lee Fong writes that what's interesting about this billionaire-backed social media astroturfing on behalf of Kamala is how badly it failed. He writes, quote, "The lofty promises of message mastery, however, often fell short. Way to Win directly financed a series of clunky YouTube shows and liberal identity politics-oriented social media skits designed to bring voters out to support the Harris campaign and Democrats more broadly. There's little evidence that such measures moved any significant numbers of voters during an election in which Democrats lost historic levels of support from key constituency groups. The youth vote, Latinos, black men swung significantly to Trump last year, upending decades of voting patterns. In fact, a series of YouTube videos produced with Way to Win money at the DNC itself received fewer than 1,000 views overall. I can tell you as the host of a YouTube-based show, that's not a whole lot. We don't feel good if only 1,000 people watch. Now, are we still talking about, why are we still talking, you might wonder, about the Kamala campaign's failed media strategy? Aren't we beating a dead horse at this point? Stop, it's already dead? Well, here's the thing. When the Democratic Party dramatically swapped Joe Biden for Kamala Harris, a move done at the behest of elites, primarily Nancy Pelosi and George Clooney, who spoke for top Democratic donors, the media helped manufacture a narrative that enthusiasm for her candidacy was genuine. It was based on grassroots support. Remember Brat Summer and how Kamala is brat? You have no idea what I'm talking about. Let's explain. As for evidence, the media pointed to pro-Kamala content on TikTok and Instagram. This was taken to mean that Harris was super popular with young people. Hello, my fellow kids. Let's actually flash back to a Rising segment, something we did, discussing this supposed phenomenon.
If you think you are seeing green, you are, because it's Brat Summer, and the green color of the Charli XCX album, Brat, is overtaking the internet for those of you who don't already know. Memes are exploding all over TikTok, Instagram, and X, and young voters are rallying behind who many of them are calling the brat, Kamala Harris.
I think it's probably worth reminding everybody that Trump actually won Gen Z voters. So much for that Brat Summer prediction did not come to pass. The media didn't see it coming, by the way. One of the reasons, perhaps, is that they didn't understand that the pro-Kamala content was, in some cases, not all, but some, bought and paid for. It's just such a sad indictment of the state of the Democratic Party. They thought the key to victory was paying progressives to make pro-Kamala memes and not, sitting down for an interview with Joe Rogan, the kind of king of podcasting and by far the most important platform in all of alternative media. Actually, scratch that, all of media, period. Remember that one former campaign official told the Financial Times that progressive staffers didn't want her to go on Rogan even though the offer had been made. Good job, everybody. What a great media strategy. So I take a lot of shots at the Kamala Harris campaign,
yes, you do.
and I think maybe we should move on with our lives by now. But this is just another example of, because I remember this time period. Maybe you do too, where it's like, oh, look at how genuine all this support and enthusiasm. Everyone's so excited that the candidate now is Kamala. What we're finding out is that there were people, paid to manufacture that narrative, and that's fine. This happens on the right too.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, it does. Oh, for
honest,
sure.
It's happening. It's happening on all sides.
Yeah, Russian money actually got taken by some right-wing content creators.
Hello,
It
Wisconsin.
happens.
Hello, Wisconsin, and Elon Musk passing out $1 million.
And we're going to talk about that a little bit later today.
Just saying.
It absolutely happens. But, don't left-wing progressive media groups track down all that funding and remind people and tell people,
Sure.
by the way,
Sure.
there's an enormous amount of funding to generate pro-Trump, whatever it is, or pro-conservative. Well, it was happening on the other side, too.
Well, look, I think that that's politics in this day and age, and I don't think we're going to get away from that. I think it's probably going to get worse as time goes on. We're seeing it blatantly happening, like I just mentioned in Wisconsin, Elon Musk passing out $1 million to voters and then calling that person their public spokesperson. So, it's getting pretty outrageous in terms of how blatantly it's happening. And with social media, it's probably going to happen even more so. And I do think the call out is important, but then tracking it and making sure that we're looking at the fine print. I think sometimes we glaze over it and we say, this is this person and this is that person when there's more nuances to it.
Well, and looking at the results, if I were a Democratic political figure, a high-level Kamala surrogate supporter entity, I think I would be furious that the money was spent this way for what? For no good at all. Trump made historic gains with the groups of people who are supposed to, this was supposed to be appealing to them. Trump won people under the age of 2016. He won black 18-year-old first-time voters, males at least.
Yeah, I was going to say,
yes.
the black women
Black
did come
women,
out.
not in the same category, but
yes.
they're an outlier now in terms of how well Trump did with the exact kinds of people that supposedly Ilana Glazer and various TikTok personalities were going to be, Harry Sisson, were going to be appealing to. It did not work.
Well, there were a lot of people we know who also did not show up at the polls at all. There was an apathetic, foundation that we hadn't seen quite like that. Older voters, young voters. We look at what's happening overseas. There were a lot of people who did not come out to vote. They were not interested and they were not encouraged. So, but the good news is that we have on this show today two authors, Amy Parnes, Jonathan Allen, who wrote the book The Fight, which is got some juicy gems about what happened on the ground, what happened behind the scenes, so to speak, in those private rooms where there was a lot of hush-hush planning going on. So I'm excited to have both of them on.
Yeah, that's going to be a really great interview that's coming up later on the show. As Bofta says, there's some fascinating details about the behind-the-scenes dysfunction, I would argue, on the Democratic side. We're going to get to that. We're also going to talk about France's Marine Le Pen being sentenced, what this says about her party's political chances. A lot of conservatives, not just in Europe, here in America as well, furious. We'll discuss more Rising right after this.